Hi guys! Sorry if you can see any of that mess back there. That is just a piece of the apocalyptic whirlwind that happens every time I attempt to pack. Now, I have moved out to the main room for this video because my lamp broke. There it is. And so I had to use our big window out here. Alas, but I do need to get this video out, or rather to film it at least. It probably won't go up for another couple weeks. But I need to get it filmed so that I can put the last of my books away in a box. The purpose of this video today is to violently kidnap a tag that was created by the wonderful Jen Campbell, who is a notable booktuber. She created a tag that was pairing books together. So pairing together books that would be interesting if read back to back. And giving recommendations based on that. And I was watching her video and already thinking about what kind of manga would pair well together, because I think that the sort of intercultural nature of manga reading would lead to some really interesting pairs of books and series, and I really wanted to bring this tag over to the manga YouTube community since it's already been going around booktube a little bit. I just think it's a fabulous idea for a tag, and she encouraged other people to do it, so yeah, I am co-opting it and using it to talk about manga. And I have come up with 10 pairs. They're not all manga, it's like a couple of them are manga paired with books, but mostly it's manga. And basically my personal criterion was, except for I think one example, they're all like a manga that is popular right now, paired with something that is perhaps less well-known or less popular. Otherwise, like in terms of the basis for comparison, it's all over the map. There's some that are like source material or historical influences, similar genre, similar vibe. That is the idea behind the tag, is that you're just pairing together books that would be interesting read back to back for whatever reason, you know, your heart desires. So the criteria are all up to you. Without further ado then, the first of my 10 pairs of manga is perhaps one of the more obvious pairs on this list, and that is to pair Natsume's Book of Friends, which is a shoujo manga, but it doesn't have any romance in it. It is about a boy named Takashi Natsume who can see yokai, which are like ghosts or monsters from Japanese folklore. He has inherited a book from his grandmother who could also see yokai that is called the Book of Friends, which she basically was bullied a lot and used the Book of Friends to take out her frustration on yokai by binding their names into the book and making them her servants. So Natsume, being the kind and gentle soul that he is, basically decides that he's going to go around returning the names of yokai to their owners. And he ends up helping a lot of yokai and humans along the way. And I suggest pairing Natsume's Book of Friends with Mushishi by Yuki Urushibara. And this is a seinen manga about this gentleman, Ginko, who also has silver hair, so there's a coincidence there. He is a mushishi, which means that he can see creatures that are called mushi, that are very similar to yokai, but perhaps more primordial. Their designs seem to resemble microbes a lot. But basically, much like yokai, as they actually are in Japanese folklore, they can be based on old wives' tales, or animals, or other things found in nature, or natural phenomena, or just like bad feelings. And he can see these creatures, most people can't. So he goes around from town to town, helping people who have been afflicted by mushi-related ailments. And in those two premises you may see the similarity in subject matter that leads me to recommend reading these two together, where they're both about sort of somebody who can see things that other people can't, and helping to solve people's supernatural problems. But more than that, they just have a similar vibe. A lot of people do refer to Natsume's Book of Friends as a sort of Mushishi Jr. because it is sort of the sweeter, kinder, younger version of Mushishi. They both focus a lot on a rural pastoral Japanese setting that's really beautiful and really relaxing. And they both create a really strong dreamlike atmosphere that makes them perfect to read right before bed. So that's why I'm recommending these two together. The second pair of manga that I have put together is actually a manga and a book, series of books. And that is going to be Yona of the Dawn by Mizuho Kusanagi. This is the story of a spoiled princess named Yona who is betrayed by someone close to her. On the night of her 16th birthday, that man kills her father, takes over the throne, and attempts to kill her, but luckily she is able to run away with the help of her trusty bodyguard, Son Hak, after learning about a certain folkloric prophecy that she is involved in. She is forced to grow up real fast and become the awesome, badass heroine that she was always meant to be. I recommend pairing this with the 12 Kingdoms novels by Fuyumi Ono. These inspired the anime series of the same title, and only the first 4 were ever released in English, but if you read the first one and then read the 4th one, you actually get the complete story of Yoko Nakajima, who is this girl right here. Yoko is your typical Japanese high school student. She's actually pretty insufferable. She's spoiled, she's racked with crippling anxiety. She's self-centered, she's kind of a brat. But one day she is faced with a man who is clearly not from our world, with floor-length blonde hair and foreign-looking clothing, who kneels before her and kisses her feet, declaring her to be his king. And then, after being attacked by monsters, he whisks her away to the world of the 12 Kingdoms, which is based on ancient China, where she discovers she has been chosen as one of the kings of one of the 12 Kingdoms, and she sort of has to fight her way to make it to her rightful place on the throne. And that is this first book. The 4th book in the series, this 2 and 3 are side stories, so it's kind of weird, but the 4th book, Skies at Dawn, is a continuation of that story after she's already on the throne, along with 2 other heroines from other kingdoms, as she deals with corruption and possible civil war brewing within her own court. So these are both belonging to a certain subgenre of manga that was shoujo manga that was very popular at the end of the 90s and the early aughts, of epic fantasy shoujo stories that really put the focus on action and adventure and coming of age for female characters over the romance. There might be a little bit of romance in Yona, but really not a whole lot. It's certainly not the focus. And there's none at all in the 12 Kingdoms. So if you're looking for a shoujo title with absolutely no romance, can't go wrong with this one. If you're reading Yona and you find that you really, really love the vibe of it, the vibe of this type of fantasy story with a strong-willed heroine and a lot of focus on adventure and politics and sort of world traveling, then the 12 Kingdoms is a great place to go next. These are fast-paced, well-written, riveting reads. I absolutely recommend them. I can't recommend them enough. The 3rd pair of manga that I have selected is me indulging myself a little bit. This, you could say, is the fruits of my own personal research, because you couldn't possibly have thought you were getting away from this list without a Moto Hagio title. At least one. You're lucky it's not all of them. But this time I am going to recommend reading The Heart of Thomas by Moto Hagio, which is the story of a boy named Thomas Verna who commits suicide at the beginning of the story. And on the same day, a boy named Yuli, the cold-hearted class prefect, receives a letter from Thomas posthumously that says, "To Yuli, one last time, this is my love. This is the sound of my heart. Surely you must understand." And after this day, Yuli, along with his roommate Oscar, and a new transfer student named Eric, who shares Thomas's face, have to work together in order to solve the mystery of Thomas's death and Yuli's frozen heart. And I recommend reading this, which is one of the first ever BL titles, with another novel. And I would say any novel by this author, which is Banana Yoshimoto. And I am picking Kitchen as an example because it is the only one I have read so far. Basically, the reason here is same historical influences. Both of these are basically attempts to make Japanese chick lit for little girls literary. So they're taking the vibrant sentimentality and melodrama and beautiful prose from the pre-war girls novels of authors like Nobuko Yoshia and attempting to elevate them and make them literary by using this sense of breathless sentimentality to tell really thoughtful and deeply human stories. And I don't know if I can find like an example in here of this breathless, beautiful prose in here. This is the way that Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto opens. She says, "The place I like best in this world is the kitchen. No matter where it is, no matter what kind, if it's a kitchen, it's a place where they make food. It's fine with me. Ideally, it should be well broken in. Lots of tea towels, dry and immaculate. White tile catching the light, ting ting. I love even incredibly dirty kitchens to distraction. Vegetable droppings all over the floor. So dirty your slippers turn black on the bottom. Strangely, it's better if this kind of kitchen is large. I lean up against the silver door of a towering giant refrigerator stocked with enough food to get through a winter. When I raise my eyes from the oil-spattered gas burner and the rusty kitchen knife, outside the window stars are glittering, lonely. Now only the kitchen and I are left. It's just a little nicer than being alone." Her writing is very breathless and very emotional and very sweet, which is very similar to Nobuko Yoshia's writing style or some of the poetry you would find in those magazines. And the same can be said of The Heart of Thomas. One of the first pages here says, "I've been thinking for nearly 6 months, thinking about my life and my death and about a certain friend. I'm well aware that I am but an adolescent child, and so I know that this boyhood love will be flung against some sexless, unknown, transparent something. This is not some simple gamble, and the problem is not that I loved him. He must love me, he must. Right now, for all intents and purposes, he is dead, and if it means bringing him to life, I think nothing of having my own body shattered. They say a person dies twice. First comes the death of the self, then later comes the death of being forgotten by friends. If that is so, I shall never know that second death. Even if he should die, he will never forget me. In this way, I shall always be alive in his eyes." And so, because of that similar basis in girls' novels, as well as a similar sort of knack for playing with gender norms, of course, The Heart of Thomas is one of the first BL titles, and Kitchen by Banana Yoshimoto has a prominent transgender character and deals a lot with rubbing up against gender norms and stuff like that. I recommend reading them together. I think it would be a fabulous experience. The next pair of books that I would suggest reading together are Tokyo Ghoul, which I hardly need to explain the premise of, but I will anyway. This is the story of 19-year-old Ken Kaneki, who, on a date with a girl way out of his league, discovers that she is a ghoul, a vampire-like monster who eats human flesh. And as she's trying to attack him, they both get involved in an accident that kills her and maims him fatally, and the doctor decides to put her organs into him in order to save his life. And as a result of that, he becomes a hybrid ghoul and finds himself having to learn to deal with this sudden insatiable craving for human flesh. And I recommend reading this with Helter Skelter, Fashion Unfriendly by Kyoko Okazaki. This is published by Vertical. It's just one book, which is one of the reasons I picked it, because it is very short. This is the story of a model named Liliko, who becomes addicted to plastic surgery, and slowly her insides, which she has a monstrous personality that's sort of developed within her as she becomes addicted to this stuff, start to match her outsides as the plastic in her body starts to melt. And these are both classic Frankenstein's monster stories with a very gothic vibe. They rely on a similar style of horror, and they both star sort of a similarly monstrous yet sympathetic protagonist in Kaneki in Tokyo Ghoul and Liliko in Helter Skelter. And in both series I find that the haunting ending really leaves you with a lot to think about, and like this huge bitter black hole in your stomach when you finish it. And I just think that the process of reading a mainstream seinen action title next to a josei art manga would just be really interesting to sort of compare and contrast styles with such similar gothic stories. The next pair of books is probably the most obvious one on the list, but I think also one of the most fun. And that is to read Maggie by Shinobu Otaka, which is the story of a boy named Aladdin who is a Magi, which means he's a magician who is tasked with choosing king's candidates who are able to enter dungeons and capture them, in so doing taking the magical weapon from inside, which has the spirit of a djinn in it. And he chooses a boy named Alibaba. And other than that, it's basically a shonen adventure manga. But of course, I recommend reading it alongside The Arabian Nights. And this is my copy, which is a beautifully illustrated picture book version with only 11 of the stories in it, but I absolutely love my copy of this. Just gonna brag about that for a minute. But basically, Maggie is loosely based off of The Arabian Nights, very, very loosely, but in a way that it's really fun to read them side by side, because you can tell Shinobu Otaka is a fan of The Arabian Nights, and she puts in a lot of fun little references and shoutouts and crossover characters that, if you are familiar with these stories, make reading this so much more fun. And of course, The Arabian Nights are such classic, wonderful adventure stories, and many of them have such wonderful, strong heroines. And that's also true of Maggie. It's a really strong adventure story with a lot of really great female characters. So I absolutely recommend reading these side by side. Number 6 here is to read JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which I'm not even going to try to explain to you. Basically, it's about the different generations of the Joestar family. It's divided into parts, each with a different JoJo at the helm. And their generations-long fight against the vampire Dio Brando. And this is the first volume of part 2, but I just grabbed a random one because it has a very fashion-inspired cover. And what I recommend reading with this, I at first thought I was going to go with something more conventional, like reading your favorite shonen series next to JoJo's, because pretty much all of modern shonen has JoJo's to thank for that entire style. But not only would that be a really long process, because most shonen manga is super long, but I also wanted to go with something a little more unconventional. So instead, I recommend reading JoJo's alongside Paradise Kiss by Ai Yazawa. This is the story of Yukari Hayasaka, who wanders into a sort of basement fashion studio just called The Studio, and sort of has this whole coming-of-age story where she learns to be a model. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, of course, is super inspired by haute couture fashion, of all things. And I just think that it would be super fun, you know, to read something campy and fashion inspired like this, along with a manga that is about the haute couture fashion industry and modeling. And again, it'd be fun to read a shonen manga alongside a josei manga like Paradise Kiss. Number 7 here is to pair two shoujo series together, and the first one is Orange by Ichigo Takano. This is the story of a girl named Naho who receives a letter from herself 10 years in the future telling her that a boy she's going to meet later that day is not with them a year later, and she has to work to stop him from dying. I recommend reading this alongside a Natsuki Takeya manga. You can choose Fruits Basket, or you could choose Twinkle Stars for this. I picked Twinkle Stars because the character of Chihiro in here actually really reminded me of Kakeru from this one, and I have no idea if their backstories are remotely similar at all, because this is as far as I've read in Twinkle Stars. But they have a similar vibe, and that's why I paired these two authors together, because they both have such a similar, like, sweet and gently melancholy vibe with these really complex but ultimately really sweet and lovable characters. And I think that both Takaya and Takano deal with mental illness, depression, and suicide with such a gentle and sensitive hand. And I really think that these would be two authors that would complement each other really well. The 8th pairing here is to pair Naoki Urasawa's Monster with a book I actually don't own, which is Mu by Osamu Tezuka. And the reason is that the villain in Monster, Johann Liebert, who is a fascinating, terrifying villain, is actually based on Michio Yuki, the villain in Mu. And besides that, Urasawa is just like a huge Tezuka nerd, which you probably know if you've read Pluto, but also Tenma in this series is named after the doctor from Astro Boy. But yeah, Urasawa's a huge Tezuka nerd who definitely wants you to read Tezuka manga, so I feel like it's only fair to pair one of his most well-known manga with a Tezuka manga. The second to last pair of books here is another one with a very simple basis for comparison, and that is to pair the shonen manga Rurouni Kenshin with the shoujo historical drama Kaze Hikaru. And the reason for this is because they both take place during the Meiji Restoration era and both deal a lot with the Shinsengumi. And I really just think that this story of a girl named Ose who dresses as a boy and joins the Shinsengumi in order to get revenge for her family would be interesting to read alongside Rurouni Kenshin, just to get sort of a shonen take and a shoujo take on the same really interesting period in Japanese history. The final sort of pair of books here is one that I am eager to try. I think this would be a really interesting pair of series to read next to each other. And that is Goodnight Poon Poon by Inio Asano, because I really wanted to have Asano on this list. He's such a big creator right now. And so I've paired Goodnight Poon Poon by him with Sunny by Taiyo Matsumoto. And the reason for this is because I just feel like Taiyo Matsumoto, who is one of my personal favorite creators, would complement Inio Asano really well. I think that their styles would complement each other. They both create these sort of surreal, alienating worlds that are nonetheless so human and so, like, real. And they both have this sort of indie movie take on how they create manga. And I thought about pairing Goodnight Poon Poon, which is obviously very surreal. This is how the main character is always drawn throughout it, with one of Taiyo Matsumoto's weirder works. I was thinking Go-Go Monster in particular, which I think would be a good matchup, but I decided on Sunny because I think it's just such a strong series from Matsumoto as far as conveying his strengths of portraying children, and specifically foster children. This is about a foster home. And this is also about a child and later young person. It follows Poon throughout his life. But I think the way that both of these sort of portray children's sort of ambivalence and fear towards adults, but also their desire to be accepted, but also their desire to be left well enough alone, the desire to remain children while also wanting to be so grown up. Both of these books portray that feeling so well, and in such a unique, like, indie-ish way. So I absolutely think these would be really strong together. And that is the 10 pairs of books that I have created. And like I said, I really want to see other people in the manga YouTubing community contribute to this tag, because I just think it's such a great idea for a tag, and that there's so much potential for such interesting pairs of books. And so I'm going to actually attempt to tag a couple people for this, for once in my life. And I'm going to tag the Manga Hoarder because, first of all, she's read a metric crap ton of manga, and I'm sure could pair together a lot of titles that I've never heard of before, and that would be super interesting. And also because I know she reads quite a bit of prose. She's mentioned that before. And I would be interested to see more like manga and prose pairs. And then I'm also going to tag Gauru from Gauru's anime and manga reviews, because he has really interesting taste. And again, I'd like to see some pairs of manga that I wouldn't necessarily think of or haven't heard of before. And especially because he really likes tokusatsu, I would be interested to know what manga he might recommend watching along or reading alongside tokusatsu series. So yeah, thank you for watching, guys. If you feel like you could contribute to this tag, please do it. I would love to see your videos. Absolutely link them below. And if you just have some great pairs and you don't want to make a video, leave those below as well. I want to know what y'all are thinking. And yeah, see you next time, guys. Bye!